Phone rang just as I was washing the dinner plates. I remember the sound sharp, jarring, slicing through the silence of my lonely kitchen. Daniel hadn't come home again. For weeks now, he'd been working late, his phone always conveniently dying right when I called. "Mrs. Harris." The voice on the other end trembled. "This is St. Mary's Hospital. Your husband's been in an accident. He's in the ICU. Please come quickly." The world around me blurred. My hands went cold. The plate I was holding slipped and shattered on the floor. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart hammered so fast it hurt. Despite everything, the arguments, the distance, the quiet dinners alone, I still loved him. I still needed him. I grabbed my coat and keys, barely locking the door before running into the pouring rain. My breath came out in gasps as I drove through the storm. Headlights blurred through my tears. Every second felt like a lifetime. I kept whispering, "Please, Daniel, hold on. Just hold on." When I reached St. Mary's, the antiseptic smell hit me like a wall. The sterile white corridors, the echo of hurried footsteps, the quiet hum of machines. It all felt unreal. My heels clicked on the tiles as I ran to the reception desk. "Daniel Harris." I gasped. "My husband, he was brought in. Where is he?" The nurse at the desk looked at me strangely, her eyes flicking toward the ICU door, then back to me. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she hesitated. "You're Mrs. Harris?" she finally asked softly. "Yes." I panted. "Please tell me, is he alive?" "He is," she said quickly. "But before you go in, I need you to do something." She glanced nervously over her shoulder, lowering her voice. "Please, just hide behind that curtain for a moment." I blinked, confused. "Hide? Why?" She shook her head. "Please, trust me, just wait." Something in her tone, an urgency mixed with pity, made my stomach twist. My legs moved before my mind caught up. I stepped behind the pale blue curtain that separated the hallway from the ICU glass door. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might echo through the hospital. Through a narrow opening in the curtain, I could see Daniel's room. He lay pale against the sheets, tubes running from his arms, oxygen mask fogging with every shallow breath. My chest ached at the sight. I wanted to run to him to hold his hand. But then I saw her. A woman was sitting beside his bed, her back to me, her hand gently brushing his hair. She leaned forward and whispered something against his ear. Daniel's fingers weakly closed around hers. For a moment, I couldn't move. The voice that came from her, soft, trembling, wasn't mine. And when I finally saw her face, my world stopped. It was Clara Ara, his secretary, the same woman who had once called me Mrs. Harris, with that polite little smile, the same woman who sent him late-night texts labeled as urgent office matters. And there she was now, weeping at his bedside as if she were his wife. The nurse behind me murmured, "I didn't want you to walk in on that." My breath hitched. My hands trembled so violently I had to clutch the curtain to steady myself. My heart was breaking in silence, but my eyes saw everything. Daniel's fingers caressed hers again, his lips moving beneath the oxygen mask. I couldn't hear what he said, but I didn't need to. The tenderness in his gesture told me the truth. The man I had rushed through a storm to save had already betrayed me long before the accident. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I stood frozen, behind that thin curtain, the scent of antiseptic mingling with Clara Ara's perfume, sweet jasmine. The same one Daniel once gifted me on our 10th anniversary. The irony burned through my chest. Clara's voice trembled softly as she leaned closer to him. "Please, Daniel, don't leave me. You promised you'd tell her. You said we'd start over." My knees nearly gave way. Each word felt like a blade twisting inside me. My fingers clenched the curtain so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Daniel's voice, weak but familiar, slipped through the steady beeps of the heart monitor. "Clara, I'll fix everything. Just don't cry." I bit my lip until I tasted blood. He was comforting her. The man I had loved, cared for, and prayed for every night was giving his last ounce of strength to soothe another woman. The nurse behind me sighed quietly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harris. I didn't want you to see this, but you deserve to know." Tears blurred my vision. My heart screamed to run into that room, to tear her hand away from his, to shout, "He's my husband." But I didn't. Something stronger held me back. Pride, maybe, or the cold realization that my love meant nothing to him anymore. When Clara finally stood up to leave, she brushed her lips against his forehead. "I'll come tomorrow," she whispered, brushing away tears that looked far too genuine. Then she slipped her purse over her shoulder and walked out past me without even realizing I was there. I stood still until her heels faded down the corridor. Then slowly I stepped toward Daniel's room. My reflection in the ICU glass startled me. Pale face, red eyes, trembling lips. I barely recognized myself. I entered the room quietly. Daniel's head turned toward me, his eyelids fluttering. "Emma," he croaked, finding surprise. "Yes," I whispered, forcing calm into my voice. "It's me." He blinked, searching my face. I didn't think you'd come." I smiled, though my throat burned. "Of course I did. You're my husband." He said nothing. Only guilt flickered briefly in his eyes. Or maybe I imagined it. I took his cold hand gently in mine, the same hand that had just been holding hers. The warmth that used to comfort me now felt foreign. For the rest of that night, I sat beside him, pretending everything was normal. I spoke softly, brushed his hair back, adjusted his blanket. But inside my heart was shattering into pieces too small to ever fit back together. Every beat of the heart monitor reminded me the man lying there was not the one I'd married. Somewhere between those long work nights and secret smiles, I had lost him. And as I watched him drift to sleep, I realized something painful, yet clear. Love wasn't what was dying in that hospital bed. It was my illusion. The following days passed in a blur of beeping monitors, whispered hospital rounds, and sleepless nights. I stayed by Daniel's side, playing the role of the devoted wife he expected, bringing him soup, reading him the news, smiling when he thanked me with hollow eyes. But behind that smile, my heart had turned to glass, fragile, sharp, and dangerous. Clara visited often under the pretense of checking on work matters. She would bring flowers, fruit baskets, and that same nauseatingly sweet perfume. Each time she entered, Daniel's face lit up, his voice softening in ways it never did for me anymore. And each time I stood quietly, watching the betrayal play out like a cruel theater I couldn't escape. "Emma, could you give us a moment to discuss office business?" he once asked, his tone polite but distant. Office business. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Instead, I nodded. "Of course," I said, my lips curling into the faintest smile, the kind a woman wears when she knows more than anyone realizes. When I stepped out of the room, the nurse, the same one who'd warned me that first night, met my gaze knowingly. "You don't deserve this," she whispered. "I know," I replied softly. "But I'm not done yet." That night when I went home alone, I finally opened Daniel's laptop, the one he'd left behind in his office bag. His passwords hadn't changed. He never thought I'd look. Within minutes, I had everything. Emails filled with declarations of love, hotel confirmations, and photos from business trips that clearly weren't about business. I read every word, every lie, every excuse I'd once believed. My tears dried into resolve. For weeks I gathered everything: screenshots, messages, receipts, evidence of betrayal, carefully filed and labeled. I wasn't doing it for revenge anymore. I was doing it for closure, for my freedom. When Daniel was discharged from the hospital, I helped him walk, fed him his medicine, and smiled as though my heart was still his. He believed the act completely. That was the irony. He had lied to me for months, but now he was the one being deceived. "Emma," he said one evening, his hand covering mine, "I don't know what I'd do without you." I smiled sweetly. "You'd probably call Clara." He froze for a second, searching my face for a hint of meaning, but I gave him none. Just that calm, gentle look he thought was love. Inside, I had already made my decision. A week later, I arranged a meeting at his office, claiming it was to finalize papers for a new mortgage. When he arrived, dressed neatly and confident again, I was waiting, not alone. Sitting across the table was Mr. Alden, Clarara's husband, the company CEO. The moment Daniel saw him, his face drained of color. "Emma, what is this?" I slid the folder across the table. Photos, receipts, messages, proof. "Just the truth," I said quietly. "The truth you thought I'd never see." For a moment, silence filled the room. Mr. Alden's expression hardened, the air thick with betrayal and fury. Clara was called in minutes later, her face pale as snow when she saw us. And as they stammered and fumbled, I stood up calm and composed, finally ready to walk away. "Consider this my goodbye," I said softly. "You two deserve each other." And for the first time in years, Daniel had no words. 6 months passed. The chaos that once consumed my life had faded into silence. The divorce was final. The papers signed. The assets divided. I didn't fight for much, just my freedom, my dignity, and my name. Daniel tried to reach out, leaving voicemails filled with regret and half-hearted apologies, but I never called back. Some words don't deserve a reply. I moved out of the house we once shared, the one filled with his lies and her perfume, and bought a small cottage near the sea. It was old, quiet, and perfect. Mornings smelled of salt and sunlight. Evenings were painted in gold and lavender. For the first time in years, I breathed without feeling like I owed someone my air. Then one afternoon, a call came from St. Mary's Hospital again. My chest tightened at the sound of that name. But this time it wasn't Daniel. It was Clara. She'd been admitted for exhaustion and anxiety after her own marriage crumbled. Mr. Alden had filed for divorce, taking everything she'd built her comfort around. They said she barely spoke to anyone, that she sat staring out the window, lost. I don't know what drew me there that day. Curiosity, closure, or maybe pity. The same nurse from before recognized me instantly. "Mrs. Harris," she said gently. "Room 2, 104, but you don't have to go in." "I know," I murmured. "I just need to see." Through the small glass window I saw Clara lying in bed, pale and fragile, her eyes hollow. Her hair was messy, her face streaked with quiet tears. She looked nothing like the confident woman who once whispered love to my husband. She looked human broken for a long while. I just stood there watching her. A part of me thought I'd feel satisfaction, that rush of victory you imagine when those who hurt you finally fall. But instead, I felt something unexpected. Peace, not triumph, not revenge, just peace. Because I had moved on, something she hadn't learned to do. I whispered softly through the glass, "You got what you wanted and lost what mattered." Then I turned away. That evening I sat by the sea as the sun dipped into the horizon. The waves whispered softly against the shore like a lullaby for the soul. I thought about that night in the ICU, how I'd hidden behind a curtain, heart shattered, watching my husband's betrayal unfold. If someone had told me then that pain would one day become my strength, I wouldn't have believed it. But it did. I found myself in the ruins they left behind. Sometimes the nurse visits me here. We share tea and laughter. She always says, You're stronger than you think, Emma. And I smile because now I know it's true. I look at the horizon, the sun melting into the water, and whisper to the wind, "Thank you, Daniel, for teaching me how to love myself enough to let you go." The tide washes over my feet, warm and gentle. This time it doesn't hurt anymore. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's justice wrapped in grace. Silent revenge.